have today. Thank you.
All right, I'm switching over here. Share, share. How does that look, Ricky?
That looks great. You're on.
Awesome. All right, so it's an honor to be able to do this talk today for all of you. I am a University of Florida alum from 1993. My wife's also an alum. We met at the University of Florida, so this was a great opportunity when this invitation was made a couple months ago. So I'm going to spend like 5 minutes giving you a snapshot of my background to give you perspective on why I have an interest in this area. I've published about 400 peer-reviewed publications related to exercise in the heat, soldiers, laborers, athletes. So obviously we have a pretty strong research track record, but I've also personally myself been involved with the clinical care for 405 people who've had exertional heat stroke, all of which have survived. So that's at triathlons, road races, football practices, cycling races, things like that. I purposely, through the last 35 years, have gone to events where people struggle in the heat so I can learn to deliver excellent clinical care. But I've also been an expert witness on 80 cases, about 40 in the laborer space, about 40 in the athletic space. And you learn a lot as an expert witness when obviously these cases happen when things go wrong. And I'll talk a little bit about some of those cases during this talk. And you might see in the parentheses up top, it says really for. I had an exertional heat stroke myself when I was a 16-year-old track and field athlete running a 10K race on the track on August 8th, 1985 in Buffalo, New York. So 2 days from now will be the 40-year anniversary of that event. And I collapsed on the very final lap, ran the turn, and then collapsed again, and I was unconscious for the next 4 hours. So I had an exertional heat stroke. I ran 9,950 meters out of that 10K race, and I was 50 meters from the finish line. But never made it to the finish line. But that did set the stage, I think, for exactly what everything I've done for the 40 years since then. So I am grateful from that perspective that one, I had great care so I could survive without long-term issues. And then two, obviously having the passion develop. So just to give you an idea of some of the things we do, a book in the top right is a textbook we use that we wrote, Preventing Sudden Death in Sport and Physical Activity. Has a lot of different ways in which you could have trouble during physical activity, cardiac, heat, head injuries, things like that. And then the bottom right is very specific to sport and physical activity in the heat, which would be very relevant for the people on this call right now. So chapter on hydration, heat acclimatization, body cooling, environmental monitoring, education, all these different things written by some of the world's experts on individual chapters. Just to give you a little bit of our background and some of the work that we do in the heat, we're the heat mitigation provider for UPS and have been for a few years. We have also worked closely with Delta Airlines. We're under contract with them. We in fact did 8 station visits this summer so far at different airports, helping underwing workers, meaning people who are out there loading equipment, loading bags, fixing aircraft and vehicles, things like that. So we're boots on the ground, really helping with people do evaluations on site. Just to give you a little bit of a sense what I do here at the University of Connecticut, we do a lot of research with exercise in the heat. So we have 2 environmental labs. One of them is opening in about a week. $1 million lab that controls altitude, temperature, sun, and wind speed. So we can recreate any situation that a laborer might face. So that's very exciting. This gives you an idea of some of the construction happening right now. I do want to mention, especially with this population, we're opening our first satellite heat lab ever at the University of North Florida in Jacksonville. We have 2 employees, Korey Stringer Institute alums who are starting there as faculty members about in 10 days. And our new first heat lab is going to be opening in January there. So we'll have better proximity to laborers who are in the heat all the time, which is one of the reasons why we partnered with the forward-thinking people at the University of North Florida there. They're also building another heat facility for us, a second one at the University of North Florida, in a brand new building that they're building that's a combination of athletics and academics. So we're very excited that we're going to have this corner suite with all the laboratory facilities, and we'll have better proximal access to a lot of the workers and people that you interact with, all the people on this webinar right now. So to just chat about some of the things I'm going to talk about today, you guys are well aware of the different heat illnesses that laborers might face. So this is going to be part of my talk, is talking about these a little bit. But the most important one of these is certainly heat stroke, right? Heat stroke is the one of those that could cause someone to die. The key to surviving heat stroke is getting someone's temperature under 104 within 30 minutes of presentation. So you need to have a plan in place in a lot of labor spaces to cool on site, because you can't depend on, waiting 20 minutes for an ambulance, then they're on site for a bunch of time. It's 20 minutes back to the hospital, 20 minutes before they start cooling at the hospital. So I'll repeat what I just said. 100% survivability if someone's temperature gets under 104 within 30 minutes of presentation. We just published a paper of 460 heat stroke victims, and the average start temperature was 108 degrees. So that means that every 106.1, there's a 110. I just treated someone who was 112.8 and who was totally fine 30 minutes later because he had aggressive cooling via cold water immersion. So just to give you a quick case study, I was recently in New Mexico at an oil and gas facility. 90 minutes on a dirt road to get to the work setting, 30 minutes on a paved road from the dirt road to get to a hospital. So the moment they call, it would be 4 hours before that person is in a hospital being treated for heat stroke. So obviously that person would be dead. And so that's why you need to have strategies to cool people on site. We'll talk more about that. This video here, I would highly recommend. It's through NFL Play Smart, Play Safe. With the Casa and NFL. And even though the NFL paid $150,000 to create this state-of-the-art educational video, it's relevant to any population. And it's really good because it goes through the prevention, recognition, and treatment of heat stroke. And it's just 12 minutes long. So really good for potentially your staff to see. We use it in the labor space, athletic, and military space. We'll come back to heat stroke more, but I'm giving you a little bit of an overview first here. Heat syncope is another potentially really dangerous one, because if someone's working at a height, working in a bucket, working in a situation, ladder, if they fall from heat syncope, obviously could cause great danger. Also, their fall or the incidence of heat syncope could cause danger for other people because of the equipment they're operating or the scenarios in which they're in. So heat syncope often happens from people who are dehydrated, overheated, and have a lot of pooling of blood in the lower body, not enough blood circulating back to the heart, causing postural hypotension, which is a fancy way of saying just the blood pressure decreases. Going to apologize for some background noise that is going to be temporary. But so heat syncope important to consider, can be prevented by certain things like when you change your body position, like getting up from a break, getting up slowly. If you're standing for a consecutive period of time, try to move your legs and your body to not be in the same position where we get pooling of blood. Really important to think about, and you might be surprised I have a slide for this, is cardiac issues, because it's not technically obviously a heat illness, but cardiac issues are exponentially more likely when people are doing exercise in the heat, especially with laborers. So laborers often are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. And when you have to work in the heat versus cool conditions, you work a lot harder, which means there's a lot more stress on the heart. And that's why we see a lot more cardiac deaths when people are laboring in the heat versus in cooler conditions. So that's something important to consider, and it can be prevented by having proper work to rest ratios, allowing people to cool down, not getting as hot, not getting as dehydrated, and obviously having regular checkups with their doctor and making sure they're capable of doing the task that's being asked of them. Heat exhaustion, another term you're familiar with. Try not to use this, I beg you even, to not use this interchangeably with heat stroke. These are two completely different medical conditions. Exertional heat stroke can cause someone to die. Heat exhaustion cannot. Okay, heat exhaustion is just the inability to continue exercise in the heat. People are not severely hyperthermic with heat exhaustion. The temperatures you usually see with heat exhaustion is 102 to 105 range. Heat stroke will likely be 105 to 112 range, like in general. There'll be some crossover there. All right, so heat exhaustion, best way to treat it is get someone in the shade or air conditioning, prop their legs, put some cold wet towels over their body and give some people cold fluid to drink. I would keep them out of activity for the remainder of that day. Probably be a good idea to see their physician. They might not be ready to return the next day. So things like that. Heat cramps, more of a massive inconvenience, but it does limit productivity for sure in the work setting. And the term that's more common in our world is exercise-associated muscle cramps, not the term heat cramps, because it doesn't technically have to be hot out to have these kind of cramps. They're often associated with unique, novel activity. Doesn't have to be in the heat. Heat makes it more likely because it creates fatigue faster. And you also have electrolyte depletion and you have more dehydration. So I purposely showing this slide because there's a lot of crossover between things that can cause death during physical activity or for laborers. So the last four can cause someone to die: heat stroke, sickling, hyponatremia, and cardiac condition. So hyponatremia is actually water intoxication. That's actually someone drinking too much. It's dilution of your sodium. But you can see a lot of similarities between the signs and symptoms. And the reason I'm doing this is that only with heat stroke, you have CNS dysfunction and you have body temperature greater than 105 at the time of the incident. You notice those two red X's. It's the only condition that gives you those two red X's, right? Even someone with head injuries, which can happen in the work setting, would have a CNS dysfunction, but they wouldn't have that elevated body temperature, right? So that's why it's important to have an accurate body temperature at the time of the incident. And it's also important to be able to assess for CNS dysfunction. So this is what happens when someone has a heat stroke and is not cooled properly. I said the 30-minute window is that first block of arrows. The second one, if it's beyond 30, we're very likely to have what's called long-term complications. If it goes beyond 2 years, we call it a permanent complication. And then obviously someone could have death. Now, someone could have death if they're not cooled within 45 minutes. It's not like a set time frame. But we see people here about 80 to 100 people a year come to testing for KSI, who are laborers, athletes, soldiers who had a heat stroke, who were not treated appropriately, but have now long-term or permanent complications. And that could be issues related to liver, kidney, exercise heat intolerance, cognitive issues, cardiac issues, muscular issues. Every person, it's different. One person might just have kidney issues and everything else is perfectly fine. Another person might just have cognitive issues. Other people could have 4 of the 6 systems that I mentioned be affected. All right. So when you cool someone under 104 within 30 minutes of presentation, we have survivability of 100%, but we also have not be able to indicate any indications of long-term issues. So there's multiple benefits of cooling quickly. All right. So you guys may be aware that during the 4 years of the Biden administration, they were working hard on the first proposed federal heat standard, which we worked hard to assist the administration with. Because obviously at KSI, we would be big fans of having a federal heat standard. And so these are some of the things that would have been in a federal heat standard. Also, I just want to make you aware there's 7 states in America right now that have heat standards. And I'm going to predict that's going to be close to 15 to 20 in the next 4 years. So you'll start seeing a lot of momentum in that area. So these are examples of the proposed federal standard that was released in the summer of 24 for public review. And it just gives you an idea of the different colors: orange, I don't know what color that is, and red. So those 3 levels would be different heat levels, like heat index or wet bulb globe temperature, and the kind of things that you would invoke based on different levels of severity. Even though we don't have a federal heat standard, this is still really good recommendations. And this is basically the template a lot of the state policies are following right now, because it was grounded in science. So this gives you an example of the states that I just mentioned to you, 7 states currently. We know of about 4 states right now that have it working through the legislative efforts. We just testified KSI at the one for Connecticut, actually, a couple months ago. But you can see the 7 states listed up there in the box. And some of them are indoor, some outdoor, some both. Some have different component areas. Like you'll see California is working towards correctional facilities. So that would be, for instance, protection actually of prisoners, because some prisoners do work while they're incarcerated. So I thought this might be helpful to see. This is just an example of some of the things that California, Washington, Minnesota have. You'll notice Minnesota has it for indoor workers. In some northern states, the indoor environment is actually way more oppressive than the outdoor environment, because some indoor situations could be 120, 130 degrees every single workday. All right, so just some of the things to keep in mind. I want you to make sure you understand that in the labor space, because that's the world you live in, very, very different than military and sports situation. And we can't apply data necessarily from sports and military situations and just assume that it's applicable. So I'll give you an example. In the military situation, at least 95% of our soldiers are between ages 17 and 27. They generally don't have comorbidities, and they generally are not on a lot of medications, because if they have big comorbidities, they wouldn't be in the military. And in athletic space, the most people in America are between 14 and 24 in terms of competitive sports. That's the big age group. And again, they don't tend to have a lot of comorbidities. They don't tend to be on a lot of medications. So in the labor space, it's a totally different world, because we're dealing with people potentially in 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. and they have 12-hour shifts instead of a 2-hour practice. It could be 120 degrees. People are going to do their job no matter what because they have to get paid. No one's calling in sick because that means they don't pay their rent or their mortgage that week or a month. All right. So it's just very, very different world. So there's individual factors that are different, but there's also structural factors that are different. Okay. So I gave you the example of New Mexico before. So I'll continue that example. They have 12-hour workdays and they're 14 days on and 10 days off. Okay, so that means you work a day and you still have 13 more days. And keep in mind, you're working 7 to 7 and you get off at 7, you get back at 8:45 or 9 o'clock to your hotel, you have dinner, you go to bed, you have to be up at 4 o'clock in the morning to make it to your site for the 7 o'clock start or 4:30 in the morning, right? And so you just worked for 12 hours at 100-degree temperature, you're probably very dehydrated. And so it's hard to make that up. So obviously chronic dehydration evolves. So there's acute issues related to dehydration and hyperthermia, but we're also starting to understand there's a lot of chronic health effects of being in the heat. So kidney issues, cardiovascular issues, other issues that when you work in the heat for 15 straight years, every single day, and you're dehydrated every day and you're hyperthermic, you're much more likely to have these other medical conditions. And that's a big cost potential for companies, related to those issues as well. There's also a lot of remote settings in work settings we have to think about. Oftentimes we don't have electricity right there. It's harder to figure out plans to cool somebody when they're hot in some situations. We have to sometimes deal with unions and immigration status. I do want to also tell you, unions are the universal protector. Over 90% of all deaths happen to workers who are not unionized. But as you may or may not know, farmers cannot unionize in America. So that's a population that is, for us, one of the greatest risk populations. So we published a study a few years back, the effect of hydration status and ice water dousing on physiological performance indices during a simulated soccer match. But even though it was soccer, it's very, very relevant for labor space because it was 4 hours long. And we used dousing of water and rehydration to see either of those alone or in combination if they would be helpful. I know it's a really busy graph. The bottom line is that the hyperhydrated group, meaning that the people that had no fluid and were the hot group, had the highest heart rate. They also had the highest body temperatures. So something as simple as having some dousing with water and hydrating during this 4 hours of intermittent exercise protected someone's heart rate, so less cardiovascular stress, and protected their body temperature. If your body temperature is not as high, your sweat rate's not going to be as high, which means you're not going to get as dehydrated in that set period of time. All right. We've also done a bunch of studies, really focusing on just cooling. So you may have heard of the product called Mission. They make some high-end cooling products. They make, you can see in the picture here, like these hats that have the backing. They have arm sleeves. They have gaiters. They have these big towels that people use during breaks. So we use these products to see, and we did work tasks. Like we had people lift these boxes with weights inside of it. They had to come down with it, do a squat, get it up, put it back on it, and they do it like for an hour straight. Then they're jog on a treadmill, then they do it again for an hour. Okay, so it was like tasks that are like just repetitive and really tough, and it's 105 degrees in the room while they're doing this, and the humidity is 65%. So it's a very tough task. We can get people's body temperature up to 104 degrees in our heat lab. They have rectal temperature in the whole time, so we're always monitoring them for safety, but it's very realistic because that's the kind of temperatures people get to when they labor in the heat. It gives you an example here of the task. And this is loaded, like it might be 40 pounds in the box, so they're having to constantly do squats, lift it, move it, things like that. We had this overhead task here where they're having to screw in these different bolts and put pipes together, because now there's like fine motor function that also is affected because of your cognitive function being affected when you're dehydrated and you're hot. So this other study we published in 2024, we had think of the worst case scenario, you just have sun. Then let's give them fluid, but we still have sun. But let's give them shade in their work environment and give them fluid. So we take the sun away, but we still have the heat, but we don't have the radiant heat. And then we now have cooling strategies, but we now also have cooling strategies during exercise instead of just breaks. So we ramped up all these different trials to see what kind of benefit they would be. And again, made them just do brutally hard exercise in the heat for a repetitive amount of exercise. So it's just a busy slide again, but these are all the different trials. The bottom line was, not surprising, the more things we did to protect them, the better off their heart rate was and their body temperature. Okay, but I know it's super simple, but these are super simple things. Like this, an Easy Up 10 providing shade, and it's less than $100 of cooling material that person can reuse day after day. It just shows you there's better performance. So we find companies care more about performance than health and safety often. So we wanted to show better performance, 14% better performance in the best scenario versus the one of the least scenarios, and then same kind of performance benefits over here in terms of time to exhaustion. We did a similar study and even stripped it down even further to just cooling products. Okay, so it was like $58 worth of cooling products. So it's like trying to make it as simple as possible. And these are washable, reusable. Someone could use them for a year. And we had, again, big benefits in performance. Trying to make it as simple as possible for companies to understand. So we're talking about just having cooling on your head and your neck and your arms, especially during break periods. So just having a cooler filled with ice water and towels can really help somebody. You're probably well aware of the NIOSH recommendations, really good compendium of the recommendations that are out there. I mention it because that's just some of the really good advice that's out there. There's OSHA heat safety tools. I'm not sure if all of this is still current on all of the websites right now. I haven't checked them in the last, say, 6 months with differences and changes in government right now. But when we talk about occupational factors contributing to heat illness, these are things that are not surprising to you. Some of them are relevant for warfighters and for athletes, but a lot of people have protective clothing and equipment on that can really hinder heat dissipation. I mentioned to you already, individual characteristics are very unique in the labor space. Some people who have comorbidities may not be the healthiest condition. They might be overweight. They might be on a lot of different medications. And these other scenarios all make sense, but I'm just as a reminder. Education is super important for this population because a lot of the supervisors actually are not medical people. So we're dealing with industrial hygienists at companies, and we're dealing with safety managers locally. And a lot of those people don't have heat training. They don't have a heat background. It's not like in a lot of athletic and military situations where we have licensed athletic trainers caring for these people who have that knowledge base. And we're really pushing hard to get athletic trainers into the labor space. And a lot of companies have been doing that. So we published this paper back in 2019, working with leadership in the government, labor space government and military government, and what modifications should be made in the heat in athletic, occupational, military settings. It's a very busy slide, but it gives you an idea of some of the current recommendations for NIOSH and ACGIH and some of the sports medicine organizations. And I think it's just a nice collection of the best knowledge that we had up to that time in 2019. So this is like a kind of a bullet item synopsis of some of the stuff that's in that paper. This is an important and impressive stat. The United States Environmental Protection Agency projected that over 1.8 billion labor hours will be lost by 2100 because of the heat at a cost of $170 billion. So there's a big cost, and hopefully a small investment can dramatically reduce that cost burden that we have. So I call it the heat tax, and this helps companies understand and gets them interested in investing a tiny bit of money. So I'll give you an example. In that New Mexico situation, I calculated it would be only $300,000 a year to take care of all of the cooling, all of the hydration, all of the treatment strategies, and all of the break things that would be needed for a year for those 400 workers. May sound like a lot of money, $300,000, but they had 5 heat stroke deaths in a few years, and the settlements for those 5 heat stroke deaths were over $100 million. So $300,000 seems super cheap compared to all of that. So decrease worker productivity. So that's a big tax that companies pay. If you just keep someone's temp at 102 instead of 104, they just do a lot more work. So that would be $58 of cooling products. Decrease productivity. If worker must temporarily leave the work setting, you have to train other people also to do that. Increase costs of replacement work or direct medical costs, costs associated with long-term workman comps, legal costs for all the cases I'm telling you about, and then legal costs associated with paying settlement or jury award. Okay, so that heat tax has gotten people, especially risk managers and other people who deal with that with inside companies. So we published papers related to this as well, productivity, the impact of occupational stress on worker productivity and economic cost. Again, I'm just giving you a snapshot because my normal heat stroke talk is 3 hours. So I'm giving you the Cliff Notes version here today. We've looked at it. And again, this might be good to share with supervisors. Ricky, I can share these PDFs with Ricky after this talk and he can disseminate it to the attendees. You guys might find these things helpful. Prevention of heat illnesses. I mentioned some of these things already, but body cooling, which I showed you publications, hydration, heat acclimatization, which is phasing in activity and getting those physiological changes, and making work to rest modifications based on the environmental conditions. So I'll briefly cover these. So body cooling, you already heard me talk about dousing. So the key to cooling, just for you guys that's not your expertise, right? The key to cooling is having cold water on as much of the skin surface area as humanly possible. That's why the gold standard for heat stroke care is cold water immersion. Nothing has been ever reported in the medical literature that has faster cooling than cold water immersion. But that's not practical in a lot of work settings, obviously. So what can we do in work settings? We can do dousing. We might be able to do cooling vests in some situations. In breaks, we might be able to use ice towels. So cold, wet ice towels, cooling vests, dousing, things like that. Okay. So next is the concept of when to cool. So everything would be based on what's possible in your company. Cooling before activity, very relevant when you can't cool during the activity, or cooling during the activity, what we call per cooling, and then post cooling would be cooling potentially during longer breaks or after the activity is done. So I'm not going to get into this. I already told you about massive performance benefits if you keep someone's body temperature lower during exercise in the heat. So I do want to share this with you. Probably the most important publication I've been involved with in the labor space. We got 58 experts together around the world who have expertise of laborers exercising in the heat. And we wanted to come up with a really regimented, really objective best practice document. That's why we used what's called the Delphi process, where all these people had a say and their voices were all heard. And this was the consensus of all of those opinions. These are the 8 different topic areas that ended up being in the document. So heat hygiene is things that people do on their own. So like medications they're on, their sleep, their behaviors that they do personally. Hydration would be things they have at work, like hydration, heat ac. These are all things I mentioned to you already, but those are the subsections of that article. There's tables. I'm not going to go through all these right now, but we talked about things that could decrease your exercise heat tolerance. Okay, so make you heat intolerant. So that's why I mentioned to you before, when people have comorbidities, other medical conditions, they're on certain medications. Look at all these things I'm listing. And think of people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. A lot of them have hypertension. A lot of them have diabetes. A lot of them have heart disease. A lot of them have these issues. Okay, so this makes them less tolerant to the heat. These are other tables from the papers, but things like this make you less heat tolerant. You're sleep deprived. You're dehydrated. You have recently had a stomach issue that might have caused nausea or diarrhea, things like that. And then these things also could play you a greater risk of heat illness as well, which none of these would surprise you. This came from the paper as well. Should a company have a heat acclimatization program? We try to make it really like user-friendly, the document, like to any of these of yes. And then these are triggering like on things that you should consider for your heat ac. We did the same exact thing for body cooling. So, and this is something that looks at heat hazards. Again, I can't go through all of this. I'm trying to give you the depth. So we did the same kind of thing with cooling. Okay, so do you have access to power? Yes or no? That'll impact what cooling products you possibly could use. And there's 6 different plans potentially for cooling for a laborer. All right, and this is the definition, description of all these different possibilities and different scenarios, because we tried to respect that every work scenario would be different. Okay, I've worked with like farm industry out in California, and like we could just get a gator that has a flatbed behind it, and on the flatbed is covered with a tent, and it has 2 porta potties, and it has coolers, and it has chairs, because that women are much more likely to drink if there's porta potties around, because they'll drink if they can go to the bathroom. And so they can constantly refill their water bottles if the chests are there with ice and water, because they might be really removed from where that water supply would be. So that just follows them around while they're working. So it's super convenient. So every situation has a solution. You just have to be willing to be creative and try to find it. There's things related to emergency action plans in the document as well. So we're getting into the treatment side. So a couple things with hydration. I am almost done. I'm not exactly sure how far I'm supposed to go. Um, do you know, Ricky or Angie, when should I go till?
Probably another maybe 5 or 10 minutes or so.
Perfect.
Angie
Yeah,
has.
perfect.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking too. So I'll go to like 140 range.
Yeah.
Okay. So when it comes to hydration, tell your workers that they can monitor it on their own. The best time to monitor it is every morning. And something super simple to do is their thirst level, their urine color, and their body mass. So something is just as simple as having a scale, checking their urine color when they urinate in the morning, and assessing their thirst. If someone's thirsty, their urine color is dark, and their body mass has changed significantly from the day before, they're definitely dehydrated. Right. And body mass changes from day to day are not fat. People don't lose fat from day to day. If they're less from day to day, they're dehydrated. All right. So that's a great indicator. So we call it the WUT principle, WUT, which is weight, urine, and thirst. I mean, that's something super simple. They're the most accurate when you measure first thing in the morning. All right. So I have this slide here. I actually just realized that I am actually done. I apologize. That's good though, because I'm gonna have more time for questions.
Yeah, there's several
So
questions. We'll take those
yeah,
in a
it's good.
minute.
I got
Yeah.
through 65 slides and I actually timed it slightly off, so I had a couple minutes to go. So you decide what we want to do here, but
Yeah.
I'll
So
stop sharing so we can see each other.
wonderful. Thank you, Douglas. So we're going to
Mhm.
go ahead and go to Angie's presentation about heat-related illness resources, and then there are several questions already. So this is a good time if you have a question for either Dr. Casa or Dr. Lindsey, feel free to go ahead and put those in the Q&A, and then we'll get to those in just a few minutes. Thank you.
Thanks, Ricky. I just want to share a couple of resources. Thank you so much, Doug, for that fantastic presentation. I have learned a great deal, so thank you so much. Give me just a second to make this full screen here. Sorry. I'm not sure. Oh, here it is. Sorry. There we go. Okay. Sorry. Thank you. So just to kind of focus on a couple of outreach materials and more information that's available from SCCAHS.
Okay,
And the
Angie,
focus, sorry.
we're seeing black screen right now, Angie.
Oh, you're seeing a black screen? Okay, let's
Uh,
see. Give me a second. Let's see.
well, we're seeing a screen that has like a small menu at the very bottom right-hand side that
Well,
says
let's
single
just
page.
try that again. Sorry, y'all.
Yeah.
Let's try this again. I may just have to share it from Adobe, so I
Yeah,
apologize.
that's fine.
Let's see.
That's
Okay.
fine.
Does that work?
Yeah, we can see it now. Thank you. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. So just a couple of focus on heat safety outreach from the FCCHS. There are resources available, including a magnet available in English and in Spanish, includes information not only about heat-related illness prevention and what to do in case of emergency. The magnet is distributed among agricultural workplaces. We also had State of a Science meeting a couple of years ago that brought together a variety of speakers on this topic, showcasing the research at intersections of heat-related illness and climate change as it relates to health and safety of outdoor workers and farm workers. A lot of information from that particular meeting is on our website as well, and there's a QR code in the next one that I'll share with you as well. Also, there are videos available both in English and Spanish that include facts and information regarding heat-related illness, and they can be included in a lot of different programming efforts that you're able to use. And here are the QR codes that I just spoke of. There are some of the resources that are available that I just referenced here are available in those heat-related illness resources on our website at SCCAHS, but also the occupational health and safety, heat exposure, and kidney health that was done with the Emory Nursing School. Information regarding that study is there as well. I also wanted to highlight some of the work that heat-related illness with the Extension. In Eden is Extension Disaster Education Network. We are actually a network, a true network of Extension professionals throughout the country who work on disasters and hazards that impact agricultural communities throughout the country. So obviously, heat related is something that is one of those issues that we are always keeping track of. Our mission is to reduce the impact of disasters and hazards through research-based education. We are a true network, meaning that we share resources, we share fact sheets, we share information with each other throughout the country. So it's a great way, especially if they've been impacted very quickly by a disaster, such as a natural disaster, such as a hurricane, and you need resources very quickly. It's something that we're able to share to get out the communities to try to help them as quickly as possible. We work collaboratively on products regionally and assessing needs and working fulfilling gaps. One of the things that, just quick map to show you that we are within the land grant institutions throughout the country, and that includes the 1862 larger institutions that you see, but also the 1890 and HBCU institutions as well. And then our 1994 tribal colleges and universities also. We usually have at least one point of contact that's working in disaster work within the Extension Service in that particular university, and many, many delegates that are working as well. But I did want to highlight that one of the highlights of our website is extensiondisaster.net, and that QR code will take you to that website, is a resource database where land grant universities from throughout the country share their heat-related illness resources. And this is just a snapshot of a couple that I pulled: Colorado State University, Michigan State University, and also University of California share these resources regarding heat-related illness and how it impacts the agricultural communities within their state. Obviously, since it is a network, it's been a great resource to look for information, but then also if you're trying to develop information for your own area, using some of this information from research-based universities is also helpful. So, wanted to share those resources with you, and I greatly appreciate you being here, and thanks, Ricky, for letting me share.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Angie. So we're going to go ahead and go into the questions or comments. So we have a few already. If you do have a question or comment for either or both of our presenters, this is the time to place it in the Q&A. So I'm going to go ahead and take it from the first question that we have. I've answered a couple of them, by the way, so that everyone knows that today's webinar is being recorded, or is being recorded, and will be posted on the Southeastern Coastal Center for Agricultural Health and Safety's archived webinar site. So you can go there and rewatch this, and please share this information. This is life-saving information. Please do share this. This is why we're doing this today, given the heat that not only the Southeast is experiencing, but all across the country at different times over this last several days or so. So please do share this information. And as Doug has said, the information will be available, the PDFs and whatnot, to share on the website as well. So the first question, not sure we can answer it, but I'm going to go ahead and put this out there. Can you explain why Florida does not have heat illness standards, especially for outside workers? I don't know if either one of you want to take that.
So I could talk a little bit about it, and then
Sure.
Angie, I'm sure, could talk about it. So you have some municipalities who've worked on it in the past and have gotten things approved, but I know leadership in the state then has not been as supportive of some of those initiatives. So I do hope someday Florida has it. I mean, Florida and Texas would be obviously the two states I would most want to see have policies, because obviously by population, they're huge. And obviously the stress of the heat and the number of laborers in the heat. So it would be exciting to see that happen.
Angie, did you want to?
I was just going to kind of echo what Doug said. I know that there are some industries and some specific organizations that do have standards, but I'm not aware of anything across the board at a state level.
Yeah. So there's the OSHA standards, but other than that, that we do not have a statewide, and I think the explanation as to why kind of falls outside of really the topic of an expertise of the speakers here today. So, but thank you for the question. So there's another next question: are you or have you submitted this information research outcomes to OSHA for public comment? So I think that was typed in before you actually got to the NIOSH OSHA component of your presentation. So
yeah, when they say FYI, when we first started helping the Biden administration, we submitted 58 pages of public comments. That was right in the first year of their administration, and then helped them, for the next few years. And then I mentioned July of 24 was when they released it for public comment.
Great. Next question is, we have heard conflicting responses to this question. I would assume there at where she's at. Do you recommend submerging someone undergoing heat stroke in a tub of ice water?
Yeah, so the gold standard is for treatment is ice water immersion. I mean, that is the accepted medical treatment. Just to give you an idea, 100% of colleges in America have them at football practices. We're at 80% of high schools now in America have them for football practices, which is impressive when there's 21,000 high schools. Every NFL team has them. But yes, we're trying to get them as everywhere as possible. The faster you cooler someone, the better, because you're trying to minimize those number of minutes. And I do want to mention one other thing, because there's a lot of people out there that don't realize this, and unfortunately misinformation has gotten out there. When someone's having an exertional heat stroke, which is what we care about in the labor space, they will always be sweating. Okay, I've treated 405 heat strokes. They were sweating in every case except one, and that's because we didn't get to someone for a while. The no sweating permeated from the classic heat stroke world, which is elderly people in apartments that don't have air conditioning, or kids left in parked cars, things like that. But exertional heat stroke, if you're there at the moment it happens to your colleague, expect them to be profusely sweating. Okay, so that's really important that we get that information out to people.
Thank you so much for that.
Mm-hmm.
Next question is, do you have a sense of the accuracy, acceptability of the less invasive core body temperature monitoring devices, such as the core sensors?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, so we've been doing a ton of studies with those core sensors and other companies. We actually have a $3 million Department of Defense grant right now looking at wearable technologies for body temperature and hydration status. That's definitely the wave of the future. That's definitely the two holy grail items, knowing body temperature with a wearable and knowing someone's hydration status. We're not quite there with perfect accuracy. So for prevention, I do think that core monitor could be useful, but for diagnosis, we always would need rectal temperature. And that's why we've been advocating so much to have athletic trainers on site in labor spaces, especially where there's a lot of workers, because you do need that temperature. And the key thing is not just for diagnosis, you need to have it for when to take them out of the tub. Okay, because you're putting them in the tub right after you get, say you see 109, you're putting them in the cold water immersion tub, you have no idea when to take them out. So you take them out when they're down in the 103, 104 range. And if you don't have the temperature, it's literally impossible to tell.
Thanks. The next one is a comment. It says, this is excellent, a little fast. I learned a lot, including information I did not know previously. It was a lot of information that was great. I look forward to reviewing it. And again, all this information is on our website. So thank you for that comment. Next is a question for Angie. It says, does Eden do disaster assistance in response to farm workers and farm working communities? Because in past disasters, we were told that the local extension office was responding to the disaster affecting the farmers and the local extension office staff members who were impacted. While this is understandable, it also left out assistance to farm workers.
Yeah, it's a great question. So the short answer is yes. Obviously, every disaster is different, and every extension office, we have 67 counties and 67 different ways that folks here in Florida are involved in their county emergency management. So a lot of our extension folks have responsibilities that involve with their county extension offices. So obviously they're working in those particular realms. But I know one example after Irma, many of our extension folks down in that area were providing foods to the farm worker families, especially the dairy workers down there in South Florida after Hurricane Irma as well. So it depends. I think depending upon what the needs are and what their responsibilities are based upon their county responsibilities during a disaster as well. And that I'm speaking from Florida, but speaking from a nationwide standpoint, it's going to depend on the state. It's going to depend on the county. It's going to depend on the extension office and what their job responsibilities are before, during, and after a disaster as well. But I do know that is definitely something that folks keep in mind on as well when they're especially when they're working response and recovery. Yeah, especially recovery.
Thank you. It's a comment, but also I think based on your previous response, Douglas, we've heard from some, including workers, that they feel immersing someone in ice is too great a shock to the body. So response to that.
Yeah, just keep in mind, when you're treating someone with heat stroke, we don't care about what the person says or feels or thinks. Okay, you're trying to save someone's life at this moment. You have cognitive dysfunction when someone has heat stroke, and from a medical perspective, like we've had people like try to escape the immersion tub. We have people punch, bite, kick, scream, but they're mentally compromised. They're 110 degrees. And if you don't do the right things in the next 20, 30 minutes, they're going to die or have permanent complications. We have sometimes have 7 or 8 people overcoming someone in an immersion tub. But we keep them in the tub because that's where they walk away a couple hours later and they're totally fine. But if they stay hot long, it's not good. But I do want to mention one thing, which is ironic. The state of Florida is one of the top 2 states in America for health and safety standards for high school sports. And they're actually ranked number 2 out of the 50 states right now. And they have great leadership, like with moving forward policies. And ironically, you require cold water immersion tubs at every single high school football practice in July and August in your state. That's a requirement. You also require wet bulb globe temperature meters at every single high school in your state for athletes. So it's ironic that you have these amazing policies for athletes and it's only a 2.5-hour practice, but you don't have policies for your workers who are doing 10 or 12-hour shifts. So it's certainly an opportunity to make changes and make progress. But I do want to tell you that you already have amazing leadership protecting your athletes in your state right now. And I do want to just say 2 quick things that came up with the other questions. One is the comment that was very fair that it was a little fast before because I tried to talk too fast. But I will share the papers with Ricky to give you an overview. Like I said, that most times when I do this in a work setting, this is a 3-hour talk. So it gives you a chance to really dive deep into each of these concepts. So I will share it like 8 or 10 PDFs so you can do a deeper dive. And then also, I just want to make sure people understand, I'm sure you've heard the acronym WBGT, which is wet bulb globe temperature. And it's really important that you utilize WBGT over heat index. Very few people know that 60 years ago, when heat index was developed, it was developed for only being used in the shade, walking in a t-shirt and shorts. That was the original validity studies. Okay, so again, I'll say it because how important it is. In the shade, walking in t-shirt and shorts. It's very irrelevant for a football player or a laborer in the heat because we're in the sun and they're often very intense. And we're often not in t-shirt and shorts because sometimes we have protective gear on. So heat index needs to be thrown in the garbage can. So wet bulb globe temperature takes into account the radiant heat load. It really takes into account the humidity because it's 70% of the calculation. It factors in wind speed. So that is the better indicator of an environmental load someone's facing from a human factors approach. And then that's when you make the work to rest ratio modifications based on the wet bulb globe temperature. Hopefully that was helpful.
Thank you. And actually, I think that you might have actually kind of responded to some degree to this next question, which first was a comment. Thanks for the presentation. Thank you for that comment. How do you usually take humidity into account when considering the impacts of heat? And I don't know if you had anything more to add to, but you just really talked about it. Yeah.
I'll do it like a 2-second thermal physiology overview. We have a semester-long class just on thermal physiology, but just the humidity is the key factor that drives the rate of rise of body temperature when you exercise outside. And the reason being is if it's really humid, and you know this from being in Florida, the sweat droplet falls off your body instead of evaporates. When a sweat droplet falls off your body, it doesn't cool you at all. When a sweat droplet evaporates, and it can only evaporate if there's a water vapor pressure gradient. And that's why like in Phoenix, in the Southwest, almost all the sweat evaporates and it really is effective in cooling. It's why almost all the heat stroke deaths that we see are in the Southeast. So when it's really hot outside, like if the environmental temperature is above your skin temp and your skin temp's around 94, so if it's 98, 99, 100 out, we can't cool via conduction, convection, and radiation. The only thing we have left is sweating. And then if it's really humid out, the sweat droplet doesn't evaporate. So that's why it becomes so oppressive and why we heat up so fast.
Thank you. And this is the last question we have right now, unless someone will type in another one. And then is this: if someone lives in a high heat environment, will their body eventually adapt to it?
So it's a great question. That's the concept of heat acclimatization. So in the first 3 to 5 days of doing exercise in the heat, you get maybe 60, 70% of the benefits. After about a week, we're at about 80%. After 2 weeks, about 95%. But you have to, so just to give you an example, and if we have any people who love sports, I think you'll find this interesting. We had the US women's national team for soccer. So the ones you see in the World Cup and the Olympics all the time, they came to our lab for the 2 weeks before the Tokyo Olympics. So they were with us every day for 2 weeks. They practiced in the morning, normal soccer practice in a nearby field. But then all of the athletes did a heat acclimatization session in our heat chamber because they wanted to get all these physiological changes in place before they went to the Olympics in Tokyo so that they wouldn't also have to deal with that. And so just to give you an idea, for it to count as a heat accession, your body temp has to be over 102 for an hour straight. So we would ramp their body temp up over 102. Like they would have hats on, gloves on, sweatshirts, long sleeve shirts. Obviously, we're monitoring their temperature. But once they hit 102, we took it all off and they would do an hour in t-shirt and shorts with their temp over 102. So that's how serious we take the science of heat acclimatization. So yes, when your workers come to you, if they've come back from vacation, come back from illness, come back from injury, a new person moving from the north, a new assignment that's more intense, the first week they're much more likely to die from a heat stroke, much more likely to have a heat stroke. So do a lot to protect people in that first week because that's when they're at greatest risk.
Wow. Well, we're almost close to the end of time. I just want to say thank you both to both speakers today. There is so much information, things that I was not aware of, and I think that I speak for probably a lot of the people who are on the webinar today, that this is extremely insightful, and look forward to watching this again and reading more about these topics related to exertional heat stroke, and of course to the resources that we have available to you as well. So with that, again, want to say thank you to our speakers. Also to remind individuals that all of this will be on our website, and as an attendee, you'll get an email very soon that will have links or information from Douglas's comments as well as his resources, and also a link to the webinar archive webinar. We do ask that you try to complete this evaluation as soon as you can, which is great. And I also want to mention that we will have a webinar literally this time next week on August the 13th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. The topic for next week's webinar is musculoskeletal disorders. It'll be presented by Dr. Jay Kim, an associate professor of environmental and occupational health at Texas A&M University, and he will highlight recent advances in agricultural ergonomics as research, as well as topics such as wearable sensor technologies and the evaluation of exoskeletons for injury prevention. And so it should be a really insightful webinar next Wednesday, August the 13th, again at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And so with that, again, I'm Ricky Taug with the Center for Public Issues Education, also the Southeastern Coastal Center for Agricultural Health and Safety. Have a great afternoon. Thank you all for joining us today. Bye.